So if we could call to order the December 8th, 2022 Vision Zero Advisory Committee meeting. You could please call roll staff so we can establish quorum.
At this time, I'm only asking those VSAC members attending in person to respond by saying "here" when I call your name. I want to remind you to unmute your microphones by pushing the button on the base prior to responding. Alternates, please also state your name if you are attending on behalf of a VSAC representative. Tracy Phelps,
Here.
Bruce Rosenzweig,
Here.
Craig Pinder, Ted Goodenough, Joan Oliva, Joanne Scaria,
Here.
Fadi Nassar,
Here.
JC Beery, David Willich,
Here.
Dean Matthews is absent today, Bruce Goiten, Michael Owens, Christian Santa Gonzalez,
Here.
Wabette Hay,
Here.
Amy Alvarez, John Roach,
Here.
Stephanie Thoburn.
Here.
We do have a
Okay.
quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So next item on the agenda is if there's any modifications. Do we have any modifications?
Yes, Madam Chair, and for the record, JC Beery has joined the meeting,
Hi, JC.
and Craig Pinder.
And hi, Craig. Nice to see you in person.
And there is one modification to the agenda, Madam Chair. The following member has requested VSAC permission to participate remotely. Michael Owens, due to the ongoing staffing shortages at Palm Beach County School District, and he has joined us virtually.
Is there any objections for Michael Owens to participate remotely? Seeing none. Michael Owens, you're approved to participate remotely. Please note the attendance in the minutes.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Next item is, are there any changes to the minutes? Vice Chair Roach, I think you're gonna catch something that I caught too.
Yeah, the first under call to order and roll call, you had Chair Thoburn as calling the meeting to order. Fortunately, due to her absence, I had to fill in, so.
Yes.
if we
Thank you.
can-
I will make that
If
modification.
we can
Thank you.
correct that.
Is there any other changes to the minutes? Hi, Joan. Okay, so seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
John? Second? Do you have a second?
Second.
Second.
Joanne beat you, David. Okay, general public comments and public comments on agenda items. Do we have any public comments?
There is no public comment at this time.
Okay, so no public comment, then we'll just move on. Comments? Didn't we vote on the minutes? Oh, we didn't vote on the minutes. Thank you. Can we, all those in favor of the minutes, say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, no opposed. Thank you, John. So comments from the board. I don't have any comments this month, but we can start around. Is anybody over here, starting with David? Do you have any comments?
I don't know, it's just kind of interesting. This is just kind of interesting. We were looking through some of our older materials that we're converting over to digital. And I found a bicycle suitability map that the county produced, actually probably back in the 90s. There's no date on it, but it has Maud Ford Lee on it and a couple of people like that. So I don't know. If anybody wants to take a look at it, it's really kind of neat. I mean, it was actually put out by NOAA and by the planning division back in the mid-90s. So it's probably the last effort that the county ever did to do a bicycle plan. Everything's been TPA since. So I don't know, just want to bring that up. If anybody wants to take a look at it, it's here.
It'd be good to see how well we did as a region, you know.
Exactly. I was comparing it against the newer ones, but it's pretty good. I
Yeah.
thought it was pretty good.
It's neat to look at history.
No comment, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Bruce, Body, John? Anybody over here? Okay, all right. Well, then let's get started. We have the VZAC liaison report. And Valentina Facuse. Did I say that right, Valentina?
Yes,
Okay, she'll be giving us the report.
thank you, Madam Chair. The TPA has two new staff members, Nathan George as the new long-range transportation planner and Clive Burr as the new staff accountant.
Welcome.
The TPA has launched a new website with features that will make it more accessible to the public. So please be aware of that. We'd like to congratulate the city of Boca Raton for being the 11th municipality to adopt the Vision Zero resolution in October. So congratulations to them. The Love to Ride Florida Challenge came to a finish November 30th, and the TPA finished in first place for its agency size with 890 logged miles and 136 rides. There will be a new Brightline Boca Raton station coming up this month, and the TPA and Brightline will be hosting a station tour on January 27th. To RSVP for that, you can visit our website. The Mothers Against Drunk Driving holiday campaign is using the red ribbon that you see on your desk today to tie one for safety if you're a designated driver, or if you will be driving, or I'm sorry, using your bike to travel for any events. The Road to Zero community traffic safety grants are now open for applications through January 6th. And for more information, you can visit the NSC website. The TPA grant pre-application meetings will be open until February, and you can schedule the required pre-application meeting on our website. The FDOT Federal Grant Information Sessions is hosting a regional information session. And for more information on that, you can visit the FDOT website. If you'd like your community to be designated as a bicycle-friendly community, applications are now open for that on the League of American Bicyclists website through February 15th. And finally, our annual Safe Streets Summit conference will be held in Hollywood, Florida, February 2nd through February 3rd. And for more information on that, you can visit the Safe Streets Summit website.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
Do we have any comments from the board on any of the items that Ms. Valentina brought up? No? Okay. Then we'll get to the next item, which is election of officers, and pursuant to section 4.3.b of the TPA's operating procedures, officers shall be elected annually at the last regularly scheduled meeting of the calendar of the year. The newly elected officers shall take office at the first regularly scheduled meeting of the following calendar year. So are there any public comments on this item, or?
Not at this time.
Okay, so first, we'd like to open the floor to nominations for the chair. I'm currently the chair. I'm okay with still serving. So if there are any nominations,
What I'd like to renominate Stephanie. I don't know if you have to since you're already chair, but you've done a great job.
You could make the motion,
Okay.
Mr. Willich.
thanks, David. I
You're welcome.
appreciate that. Okay, so are there any others? So, thank you.
And then can you get a second and then a vote?
Okay,
Michael Owens, I'll
second.
second that.
okay.
Michael, okay.
Mike.
Thanks, Michael Owens and John Roach.
You're welcome.
And for the vice chair,
Madam Chair, would you be able to just call a vote? You can do a voice. vote.
call a vote. Okay.
Yep.
I'm forgetting all of the votes today.
That's okay. You're on the holiday spirit time, so. it's
Yes,
fine.
I think so. Okay. So individually,
You can just call for the.
okay, so
for the-
all those in favor of keeping me as chair,
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I get to vote. Okay, so now we get to nominate for vice chair.
Yes.
And
I'd also like to nominate John. He's only done it for a little bit, but I think he did well last time. So
Thank you.
I'd like to nominate him for vice chair.
I'll second. Okay, there you go.
okay, all those in favor of keeping John Roach as vice chair, say aye.
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 You can vote for yourself too.
Aye.
Those against? Okay. All right, so we're ready for the new year. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item, okay, is our regular agenda. And that is the adoption of the Transportation Improvement Program Amendment number 2 of the TPA's fiscal year 2023 through 2027 tip. And Jason Price will be, yes, Jason. I don't see Jason.
Good morning. He's here. He'll be here in a minute. We're going to get him, but I can start it for you all.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Good morning. I'm Andrew Euler, Deputy Director of Program Development. So this is amendment number 2 to the Transportation Improvement Program. And this is a request by AFTAT to add funding and modify the length of 4 projects. This is for the current fiscal year 23 to 27 Transportation Improvement Program. So when is a tip amendment needed? It's really for larger changes. It's for adding or deleting a project, cost increases of more than 20% and $2 million, changes the scope of work, and changes in product phases. So for this amendment, what does it impact? It really only impacts those 4 products that you're seeing and voting on today. And it doesn't impact any other project within the current Transportation Improvement Program. And I think, is Jason here? He is, okay. And he can keep going on the products.
I got the lead upstairs. My apologies. So, as he mentioned, we're at I-95 at Indian Town Road. So this is the first of the 4 projects. In this particular project, there's they're adding funds and they're changing the length of the project. And so the length change is minor. It's only 1.18 miles to 1.4 miles. And then to accommodate this change, as well as the cost estimate increases and the inflation that we mentioned, hopefully before, they're adding these phases to accommodate that. And that's adding a design phase, adding a right-of-way phase, and adding an environmental phase. And all of those phases are incorporated into the next slide, as well as American Rescue Plan Act funding has been allocated to this project. And that's in about $9,700,000 in American Rescue Plan Act funding. So when we look at the details of what this looks like as the proposed tip changes, in these particular slides, as we go through them, you'll see this one for each one of the 4 projects. For this one, the existing tip is showing what it looks like today, currently adopted. The proposed tip changes are on the bottom. And so here we'll see in the highlighted parts, for the phases to the left, you'll see that there's the additional design phase, the additional right-of-way phase, the additional environmental phase. And then just to point out, and for construction, there's also additional local funding that has increased, as well as the American Rescue Plan Act funding. So all of those highlights are the ones that were on the previous slide. And this is exactly how it will look when it's formally adopted by our governing board. So the next 3 projects are all resurfacing projects. And I'll go over the first one, which is State Route 80 from US 27 to east of Glades Glen Road. And this one also adds funding and changes the length of the project. And this is out in the Belglades area for State Route 80. And so the length change goes from 2.6 miles to 2.16 miles. So it is a shorter segment. They're adding an additional design phase. And they're also increasing the construction cost to $6 million. And there's also a local funding component that is also increased as part of this particular project. And so again, the existing, the way it reads in the tip currently is on the top for the existing tip, and the proposed changes is on the bottom. You see the new additional phases that they've added here for design and construction. And you'll see that the local funds have been added as part of the construction cost, and then the additional funds for this particular, they're using advanced construction funds to add additional money to this particular project to accommodate the changes that they're proposing. Now, this resurfacing project is also out west. This is State Route 15 from north of First Street to the Palm Beach County, Martin County line, next to Lake Okeechobee. So they're adding a design phase for some funding, and then they're increasing the construction cost to 4.24 million with additional local funds that's incorporated into the construction funds. And again, this is advanced construction funds, which are state funds that they apply to this particular project. So once again, you see the top is the existing, the bottom is the proposed with the additional phases incorporated, and then the advanced construction funds that increase the total cost for the construction. And I believe this is the last of the 3 resurfacing projects, in total 4 projects. This is they're changing the length of, they're adding funds and changing the length to this project. And it's along State Route 7, north of Southern Boulevard to Okeechobee Boulevard. They're increasing the construction cost to 2.29 million with additional local funds. And then the advanced construction funds, which are the state funds, are also been added to this particular project. And just once again, the existing is on the top of what it currently looks like. And then the proposed changes are on the bottom with the additional local funds that are added, and then the advanced construction funds to increase the construction funding for the project. And overall, what we are hearing from the Florida DOT is there's cost estimate increases. And we've seen this across a lot of the projects, as well as inflation. And so they're finding funds through either advanced construction funds or American Rescue Plan Act funds and applying them to these projects because they're in 2023. So they're coming up for construction soon. And so they're applying these funds to these particular projects to move them forward to get them constructed next year or in the next fiscal year. And so with that, I'm looking for a motion to recommend adoption of Amendment 2, and I'll take any questions at this time.
Are there any, thanks, Jason. Are there any questions from, comments from the public on this?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay. Do we have, board comments? Oh, yes. Body?
3 of the 4 projects are resurfacing, and I think asphalt is, derived from oil, so the price increase is kind of understood. Do you want to go over the first project?
Yes.
So the cost, I think, went, I don't have the number, but something from, I don't know.
It's $10 million.
Yeah, from the overall cost, from what number to what number they increased?
Let's see. Slides.
13 to 22, 21, 23.
Yes, it's a significant increase.
Could you provide a little bit more information?
Yes.
Why would it almost double in cost?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts to this particular project. It's not a simple resurfacing project. Like you mentioned, the other 3 projects are just resurfacing projects. For this particular project, that I-95 at Indiantown Road, they're reconstructing and signalizing the I-95 and northbound off-ramp. They're also lengthening the eastbound Indiantown Road left turn storage lane. They're adding an eastbound merge lane or auxiliary lane on Indian Town Road from from the I-95 exit to Island Way. They're adding a westbound merge lane or auxiliary lane from the Jupiter West Plaza to I-95 southbound off ramp. So there's multiple merge lanes that they're adding to the project as part of the off ramp. So
So all the stuff you mentioned are in addition to what was
nope,
initially.
that's,
planned?
so this is an existing project. They're not changing the scope in any way. They're just adding additional funding because of the cost increases and inflation. The cost estimates came in well above what they expected. And so those cost estimate increases require additional funding. So they're utilizing this American Rescue Plan Act funding, which is recent new infusion of funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law, the federal bill. And they're using those funds immediately on this particular project to cover such significant increases. And I would say that there's more happening with this project than the resurfacing project. So the costs have just increased significantly. And some of the background from the TAC, from what we heard yesterday morning, the local funds went up significantly as well. So just to look at the local funds, they went up considerably by a couple of $1 million. And we're asking, FDOT is asking the locals to come up with a few $1 million, which they don't have.
2.6.
Yeah, so we're gonna coordinate and work with the project managers and FDOT and the count and Jupiter to figure out what to do about covering the local cost and how can we accommodate that, or, either changing the scope of the project or finding additional funds to keep it whole. But the project isn't going away. It'll still be constructed. We just have to work within the funding that's available. So that's going to be an ongoing discussion between FDOT and the municipality.
Okay, thank you.
John,
On
we're going to
the-
come back to that, but I want John to go
Yes.
first.
Back to the resurfacing projects, a lot of them, they're changing the length by reducing the length, is that? But at the same time, they're adding funds to cover cost increases. Is the
Yep.
reduction to try and bring down the costs? Or is it a change in they've just identified that they don't need the full length that they originally identified?
I would assume so, that when they it's already they should have full design plans, so they know what they're already looking to do. But I think with the cost overruns, the cost estimate increases and inflation, they may be able to trim a little bit of the length of the project to to keep the cost under control, but not alter the project significantly enough to where it's not effective. So, I would think in a resurfacing, maybe the next time they resurface the next segment, that segment could be covered, or you look at the entire length of the segment and those ends, I don't think when they trim the length of the project, it's probably at the ends, and you would look at the roadway conditions to say, are the ends of the roadway in as poor a shape as the entire segment? So maybe they're just trimming it on ends to where it's not as bad as the rest of it. But that's just me making an assumption. They don't really give me those details to say, well, we're increasing the cost, but reducing the length of the project, which seems counterintuitive, but in the
Right,
end,
and I guess that was part of basis of my question was they are adding funds and, rescue funds and things like that. I didn't know was rather than add more funds, they're using the reduction in the length as another means to bring the cost down, or is it just other factors that are playing into changing the length? So I was just curious. A lot of times with these amendments, no fault to the TPA or what have, there seems to be a lot of missing details or
Yes.
information as to why the amendment is, other than, cost increase in materials, I think we're all aware of, but
Yes.
anytime there's a change in the length or a change in the design or, what the original design was versus what they're proposing, there seems to be a lot of missing information often.
And it's a consequence of getting the information late. I get the information within a week. I process it as quick as possible to get it out to all of our committees a week before we meet. And then I try and follow up with as many questions as I could think of to really scrutinize the project, figure out what's really happening, because it's not necessarily in the letter, the request letter for the amendments. Now, let me preface, I'm making some assumptions here of why the lengths have changed. And sometimes it's just administrative errors. Sometimes the true length of the project is what they're changing it to, because there's the project managers, when we develop the tip, have to look at every single project and how it's worded and written in their draft tentative work program or their snapshot that they provide to me. And oftentimes the wording is wrong in the description, the length is in error. And if the length is in error over a half mile, then they can request it. We can do an administrative change if it's under a half mile, but if it's over that, then it has to become a formal amendment. And so, you know, in some of these projects, it could actually be an administrative error to where the true length is what they're changing it to. And what I had before was it was larger than it actually was. And because that's just how I mean, there's errors and there's a margin of error, the human error of taking the data that I get from them in spreadsheets and then adding, you know, incorporating that information into the program that we use to develop the tip. Sometimes errors happen in the length, or the project manager didn't update it to the current lengths that it is. And I get a laundry list of requests for minor changes because they find these errors after it's published.
Whibbit, did you hear as the FDOT representative?
I was going to just add on to what he mentioned. Unfortunately, with the way the economy is currently, we've been having a lot of, like, literally every one of our construction project and design projects are coming in over budget. So we have to either do some creative way of getting the projects out by either cutting the length, asking for more money, or putting more money on the project. I just recently had a project that's a trail that we're building in St. Lucie. It came over $2.5 million over budget. So unfortunately, that's not something that we have control over, because we are not actually going out and actually building the projects. We have to put it out for bid, and based on what the bid comes back at, then we have to figure out a way to adjust it or get the projects built. So I'm not sure why it's reduced, but sometimes that's another mechanism that they use to either cut costs by reducing the limits based on how the roadway looks. So that's just my explanation, just to help out a little bit.
Okay. Any other, John?
And by my question, I'm not criticizing the reason for the change, you know. I
Sure.
think if we can just make a generalized request that anytime these amendments come forward, that we have a clear understanding as to not only what's being done, but why it's being done. I mean, if everything's happening because of cost increases, if the project scope is being changed, or the length is changing, or the funding's changing, you know, just identifying the reason for all of that, I think it would be, then we wouldn't have to make so many assumptions. And I
Yes,
think that'd be
and
helpful. So
in the letter that I received, that when they formally make the request to me, they specifically spell out that it's cost estimate increases and inflation. Those are the primary reasons why the costs have increased. However, as you noted, if there's a cost increase, but the length is being reduced, it raises questions because it's counterintuitive to see it getting shorter but costing more. And that reasoning, that explanation is excluded from the formal request, because the request is written in a way to respect the fact that it's required for them to do it by state statute, that there's specific reasons why an amendments are triggered if the cost increased over a certain amount of the project, or there's a half mile difference in change. Those are the true triggers to require an amendment, but that doesn't include explain exactly what is happening when you're increasing the cost but reducing the length, which is something I need to follow up with quickly when I receive these amendments, which is usually in short order, to really get these questions to bring them forward to you to have a better answer.
Bruce?
Yeah, I'm glad you used the word that came to mind when I was considering this, counterintuitive. You know, if the project is shortened, why isn't the cost shortened? But as well, as far as cost increases, I'm recently retired from the construction industry after 40 some odd years. And I had noted clearly the, you know, cost increases. And I read the papers a bit. I see what the rate of inflation is, and those numbers played against these cost increases well above 40% in this first project. They don't seem to jive. But what is apparent is that there's not enough information to explain why that is. So perhaps we could get some information as to exactly what those cost increases are. Perhaps they've gone up in the last year and a half that I'm not aware of. And
Like material cost, you mean like asphalt, concrete?
material costs and labor costs.
Sure.
You know, I'm a sort of a cynical person, and you know, with labor and material shortages, I'm not so sure that there might not be some, you know, some areas out there where there's, you know, advantage being taken of the fact that there's
Sure. Right. Yeah,
so.
Okay.
which is possible.
Tracy? Oops, Tracy?
Yeah, there are significant material shortage.
Can you talk into your mic, please?
There are significant labor shortages now. It takes almost 8 months to get a mast arm for a traffic signal. So if your manager wants a traffic signal built right away, just kind of laugh at him and turn around and do whatever you can to keep your job, because it's not going to happen. All traffic and electrical stuff is probably a good, it's going to take twice as long as you normally think you would get it. So those material shortages also add to the cost because it causes delays in the project and or makes the time of the project needed, the added time needs to be go into the project, which increases the cost. So it's a bunch of stuff all
Yeah,
coming at the same time. It's shortages, inflation, cost. And I mean, I was amazed to see it. Construction costs go from 1 million to 9 million. Just for a resurfacing project. I assume there's more than resurfacing going on there. But there's a lot of things that's causing this. It's just not one thing. And it's hard when we look at it, we don't know what it is. So well, I agree with that. What everybody else says, it'd be nice to have some reason why things are happening. Don't need to be specific, but some type of general reason why a project goes up $10 million. A resurfacing project goes up $10 million. Because asphalt, it's still just gravel, sand, and tar. So that's stuff that's plentiful. I don't know why the cost of a milling resurfacing project went up so much, unless there's traffic and bridge or drainage work. So it's just kind of a guessing game. 2 million, I understand, but that one project was $10 million, 13 to 23. And
yeah, I'm
we're
looking.
gonna approve $10 million. We don't know why, other than the obvious.
Yes, so if nobody, oh, David?
I was wondering if any of the additional costs for the Glades projects were in regard to like demucking. If you ever been on Glades roads, they have a tendency to, kind of be undulating and the roads sink into the ground. And I'd put recommendations in when the multimodal request came in to, investigate going deeper than just resurfacing. I was wondering if maybe that was some of the additional overruns, because if you resurface a road that's so bumpy and terrible, it's just gonna do the same exact thing. I mean, really to make it a uniform level surface, something additional has to be done. So I was wondering if that had anything to do with the additional money.
Yes,
I-
so I think we've heard that we would like additional information when substantial changes besides, I mean, in particular, and thank everyone who brought up the Indian Town Road item, because my question is related to you brought up local funding costs and obviously Jupiter has been asked, but does that include Belglade and Okeechobee have as part of this TIP amendment also have to increase their local funding provided?
Yes,
Okay,
there's been additional local funding almost all across the board for all of these projects. The local funding portion has increased.
because, I think from, this is the beginning of our fiscal year. Our budget's been set. Talk. Okay, do you hear me? Okay,
Yep.
so our budgets have been set and it's really hard. I know people think that it's Jupiter and it's okay, pull another $2 million out of your budget. But it's, there's other things that are going to suffer because of it. And if there's Belglade and Okeechobee who are going to have to increase their budgets because of this, then, in our case, the $10 million increase was also reliant upon estimates that were not as sharpened as they should have been. I also question the additional right of way. We weren't $540,000 for additional right of way requirements. Is that purchasing right of way? That was, we've been working on right of way dedications for years, and we've been waiting for this project for a long time in order to address some of our traffic concerns. So, it's just, and with it, I'm looking at you because I know it's FDOT project. We want this project, but these late amendments that are costing us, significant dollars at the expense of other projects that are desirable and wanted from our constituents are hard to swallow. While it's a priority, we'd like to try and figure out some other methods and I understand that ARPA money's being used to supplant some of that or, prop it up some. But I'm wondering the other thing too is like on some of these, if there's opportunities for, if you're improving the roads as part of resurfacing, in our project, there's a plan to do a new sidewalk as part of the improvements on the south side. Are there any opportunities for the local governments to look at, any of the transportation alternatives or local initiative grants that, coming up in January, can we like hustle and get something done, to help with that? I don't know, but I'm just asking the question because, and not just for Jupiter, but also with Belglade and Okeechobee, because these things are, important for those municipalities as well. Just trying to think of other ways to help that, might soften that blow for local funding when there's a significant change. Understanding, I mean, we've all experienced the inflation issue, get that. But, Bruce, you're right. 40% increase in a project is a lot to stomach when our budgets have been set. So
definitely we should be able to and I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for, but maybe we can talk offline and see what we can help you with. Because they are funding, other funding source for transportation improvements that we could probably tap into. But I need a lot more specifics for me to be able to say, okay, definitely. There, and understanding that there's a pinch, not only in the design money, there's a pinch everywhere along the line because everything is going up. But if you wanna give me more details, then I could see where we can pull some money and help out with.
Great, thanks. I'm asking for Belle Glade and Okeechobee too, just to be clear. Okay, do we have any other comments? All right, so. And did we do public? We already did public.
You did ask about
Okay.
public comment.
So then I mean, we're still supportive. We're just trying to wonder about how we're gonna pay for stuff as far as the town. So do we have a motion to approve the amendment to the tip?
I'll make a motion to recommend adoption of the amendment number 2.
Okay, Christian makes the motion,
I'll second.
second by Craig. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Nay, that was Joan and Bruce. All right,
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, Joan, would you be able to provide reason for your dissenting vote?
Sure, I don't have a clear path of understanding why those costs have gone up so significantly. And I would need to know that before I voted on anything.
Thank you.
thanks. All right, so then with that item dispensed, we have the next item is the recommend endorsement of the FDOT fiscal year 2024 through 2028 draft tentative work program. And Jason and Andrew are going to give a presentation to go over this item.
Okay, moving on to the second action item. I'm going to now present with Andrew the TPA's executive summary of the Florida DOT's draft tentative work program for the next tip cycle, which is 2024 through 2028. And the draft tentative work program is incorporated by way of our Palm Beach TPA mission to collaboratively plan, prioritize, and fund the transportation system. In that, this is the request to FDOT to fund our TPA priorities, which is built into our TPA mission, as you see on the screen here. Now, the way the draft tentative work program fits into the TIP development process, it is a crucial part of incorporating the requests that we provide in our list of priority projects, which you saw back in July of 22. And that list of priority projects is provided to FDOT to incorporate those projects into their draft tentative work program and apply funding where feasible to those TPA priority projects. And that's what's before you today. Moving forward, once this draft tentative work program is formally approved by our governing board, we'll see a draft tip and a formal tip later on in next year in 2023 for the next adoption of the Transportation Improvement Program. The role that we play in reviewing the draft tentative work program is we work closely and cooperatively with FDOT to incorporate our projects to the maximum extent feasible where there's funding available for our TPA priorities. And FDOT will make a presentation to the board, our governing board, and previously to our TAC to present all of the what their outline is for the next cycle of projects in the draft tentative work program. And this is the opportunity to hear those requests and then make additions, deletions, or adjustments to any of those projects that we see in the draft tentative work program. And so what we're going to review today is the three primary TPA priority projects grants, and that's the state road modifications, local initiatives, and transportation alternatives. All three of these are competitive grant programs. They have funding amounts assigned to each: 20 million for state road modifications, 26 for local initiatives, and around 5 million for transportation alternatives. And we're going to move into a little more detail on these particular programs, starting with state road modifications, which will be presented to you by Andrew Yu.
Thanks, Jason. Okay. So starting with the state road modifications, I'm going to be going through just the major highlights we have for you. The backend material has the summary of our priority projects in there. And then Jason's going to go through the local initiatives and transportation alternatives. There's other products within the draft tentative work program. There's hundreds of them to go through, but we're just focusing on the priorities here today. The first one, state road modifications. So this is a program where it's eligible on state roadways. It typically uses mostly state funding sources to do that with state gas taxes. We typically expect around $100 million of federal and state funds a year on this. It does compete with other products in the work program. A lot of that state gas tax goes to a lot of priorities, not just the TPA, but also for FDOT. What you'll see in this program, draft tentative work program, is $63 million of that being programmed federal and state funds towards this. So that is a little bit different than our target there. The reason being is one of the major projects we have, State Road 7. It was earlier on in the in our program, was in our tip right now, actually, for fiscal year 2022. But that project still has ongoing permitting issues that is being worked through. We don't have a final date on that. Final litigation for that. It's still going to take some time. FDOT does not have a final work production date for those two projects, but to try to keep those prioritized, they were able to move them out, but unfortunately to a later year. So the new fifth year, which is fiscal year 2028, is when the portion of State Road 7 Okeechobee Boulevard to 60th Street will go in, and then the other section from 60th Street to North Lake is for outside of the draft tentative work program. They were not able to move this project into an earlier year of the work program because of the significant cost increases, one due to ongoing issues with inflation, and then other ones was major design changes that needed to be incorporated that really boosted up the cost of these projects. So you went from $59 million to around $87 million for that northern section, and then $21 million to $39 million for that southern section. So trying to get that large amount of money for cost for construction into 1 year is difficult. And that's why it was tough to try to get it anywhere earlier in the work program, because it would have had significant impact on products already going on and trying to be done in the work program. Also, I wanted to provide an update on, I'm sorry, excuse me, one more part of that. Because we were not able to FDOT was not able to find outside money for fiscal year 28, when it comes to sort of those other state funding sources that we would typically want to see in the state road modifications, since it is still a major TPA priority, they had to use money from our surface transportation funds, which is the funding that we use towards our local initiatives program. So we have two application cycles for both local initiatives and transportation alternatives. That local initiatives one, it's really eating up all that money in the new fifth year for State Road 7. And I'll go into more detail on that in a second. Other updates, Atlantic Avenue, still on schedule for fiscal year 24, the western portion of that project. And then the other project to the east has been broken up, but it's Atlantic Avenue from Lyons to Turnpike on schedule for 27. And then Atlantic Avenue widening from Turnpike to Jog. Construction is still outside the work program. So going in a little bit more detail about that last portion I said about State Road 7 and that local initiatives funding. You'll see on the screen here the breakdown of that $39 million in cost for fiscal year 2028. Those two top funding codes are ones that we have to use towards priorities for the TPA that are federal funds. We historically use these, and we try to use these towards our local initiatives program. all that money for that year for local initiatives is beaten up by this State Road 7 project. So what you'll see in the next few slides for Jason is not many of those projects for that fiscal year that was applied for are going to be funded. And then you can see the total there from the other funding sources on this project. And there's a map there that shows you the limits of that. So from Oak Tree Boulevard to 60th on that southern section, and then that northern portion that's outside the work program. Here's just a display of the Atlantic Avenue funding and how that's coming in. So that western portion for 2024, then heading east, we have the one for 2027, and then the Turnpike to Jog section outside the work program still. Other updates we have for you when it comes to state road modifications, just some small updates. The first one is Oak Tree Boulevard. This is the next step in the process. We're finishing up that corridor study now. You're going to hear today the results of that corridor study that the TPA has been doing in the past 2 years. And then the next portion of this is AFDOT is going to look into more of a feasibility study based on those alternatives that we provide. That is scheduled for fiscal year 2025 for that study. Next is another study that is being completed by AFDOT. It's finishing up soon, and that's a US 27 connector roadway from US 27 to State Road 715 out in the Glades area. That was a preliminary study as well. There's additional funding that has been put into the work program in an outer year for some preliminary product development study, but we'll provide more information on the results of that study, and we'll have AFDOT come in and provide a presentation sometime early next year once they complete that US 27 connector study. Other minor updates. There's some funding in earlier years for design of a lot of signal products we have in our state road modifications program. Some small sidewalk improvements, and then some lighting improvements on Congress Avenue. So all those design phases were able to be jumbled up a little bit more and go 1 year earlier into fiscal year 2026. And my last slide for you all, and before I pass it back to Jason, is just other products we're seeing in the work program that aren't in our priority list, but I just wanted to give you a heads up about some new ones that would be the first time you're seeing them. The first one is an extension of Flavor Pick Road from Lyons Road to Hagen Ranch. This is a county project. It's mostly still county funded, but it has a little bit of money from a state funding source called County Incentive Grant Program. It has set construction for fiscal year 2028. And then there's multiple AFDOT resurfacing jobs in 27 and 28. We take a look at these and work with the product managers, and the product managers also work with the local municipalities to incorporate any other scoping changes that they may want to see in that before they start design. So those are coming on board in 2027. So we'll be looking at those pretty soon here as design will be kicked off next year. And then lastly, there's 2 new bridge rehab products that were added to the work program for construction in fiscal year 2028. Jason?
Thank you, Andrew, for the overview for state road modifications. So as you heard with state road modifications, those particular projects, in particular, the State Route 7 extension, has eaten up a lot of the surface transportation funds that are also used for local initiatives. So as a consequence of that, from last funding cycle, we see here on the slide that basically a majority of all of the projects from last funding cycle have not been funded because all of that funding has been eaten up or allocated to State Route 7 extension. The only one project that did receive funding is SFRTA that operates Tri-Rail for a passenger rail car. That was successful due to, you get twice as much money when you fund these particular projects because they flex the funds that we provide to FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, and then they match those funds with other transit funds to double the funds to, we provide 2.5 million and then they get another 2.5 million in transit funds to enable them to purchase the transit cars. So the money goes a lot further in the transit environment or transit world. And so that one was the single project that was funded for that entire grant cycle. What we are proposing is depending on next Thursday, when the governing board approves the draft tentative work program and how that works out, or when we see the next tip development, we are planning to reach out to all the applicants that were not funded this year to see if they would like to be considered for next cycle. So we would take these projects and incorporate their raw score into the rankings for this particular grant cycle with the new applications that we receive. And so these projects wouldn't necessarily have to reapply again or be dropped off the list because they already have an eligibility determination designations. So they've already been looked at by FDOT. They're eligible for funding. And so if we advance them forward to the next grant cycle, we'll just put them into the competitive process of ranking these along with the new applications. The best news of all is transportation alternatives, the program that you are most familiar with and that you see these projects as they come through and also rank these projects. This particular funding is a different source of funding and it's more dedicated for specifically transportation alternatives. And so that funding is more secure and all of the projects that we saw in the last grant cycle are now funded for construction in fiscal year 26 as recommended and expected. There is a 3-year target of 15 million for that 3-year period. The programmed amount that we do see for this draft tentative work program is only about 10 million in federal funds. So there's a difference of 5 million. And that 5 million does still exist. It's in reserve with FDOT, and we're going to work collaboratively with them to find locations to program those funds. And the first place we'll look is when bids come in for these particular projects that come through transportation alternatives. It's often the case that when bids are received, they are over the estimate that is expected or that's allocated to it. So that 5 million will go towards covering those construction cost increases and inflation. And then if there's still a balance, we'll look to advance other transportation alternative projects with that remaining 5 million. In an earlier grant cycle in 2019, there was a project that was withdrawn at the request of the applicant in Palm Beach County, and that's the Okeechobee Boulevard pedestrian improvements in Loxahatchee Grove. So that concludes the 3 transportation priority projects and grant programs. And at this time, I'll take any questions.
Let's start with public comments.
There are no public comments at this time.
All right. Now to the board, are there any comments, questions? David?
I was kind of wondering what's involved. There was a carbon reduction contribution for the one project at $2 million. I can understand. I mean, if it reduces congestion, carbon reduction there, what else is involved with that?
So I think you're referring to the State Route 7 portion
Yes.
that's being widened, and there are carbon reduction funds applied to that specific project. So on that project, there are bike lanes and sidewalks that are adjacent to the roadway that would be eligible for that particular funding. So it is a widening project. However, there are multimodal facilities on the ends of those projects where that funding would be able to be applied.
And it's a win-win for us. I mean, you get money and you get facilities.
Yes. They're and it's a significant increase in cost. So they're just looking to parse out, find as many different funding sources or enough money to cover the large increase in that project since it has moved out to 28.
Okay, great.
Joanne?
I have significant concerns on the solution to sweep the LI fund to fund State Road 7. I mean, these are projects that are important to all of our municipalities. I'm speaking up for Boca here. I'm speaking up for Delray, Indian Trail, and of course Gardens and Pontchartrain as well. I mean, those are all projects that have been worked on, vetted, and determined eligible. And this is very disappointing to hear the solution from the TPA. It undermines the entire LI process. What message does that send to applicants that are thinking about applying this year? I have major concerns on that.
Understood.
John,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as a representative of West Palm, you know, our stance with regards to State Road 7, but you know, I concur with what was just said about the sweeping of the LI projects. You know, a lot of time, a lot of energy, there's expectations from the community. It presents a lot of uncertainty for future competitive cycles. You know, it's easy to say, yeah, we'll throw you in the mix with other projects, but who's to say that they would rank as high as they did, you know, in the year in which they won? You know, it's interesting to sweep those projects off, and in addition to that, to use carbon reduction funds for a project out west for additional lane miles on a roadway through a preserve and so forth. So, you know, I concur with, you know, the consequences of losing those 6 projects at the expense of the State Road 7 extension. You know, I think you heard yesterday, there was a lot of discussion, you know, at the TAC meeting, you know, about those concerns. I think there's even question whether anyone in West Palm had been informed of these changes, both from a timing perspective, you know, that it was being pushed out, but also that there's design changes and what those design changes are to consist of. Especially with an $87+ million increase, I think, in the project. So there's a lot of concerns as a West Palm representative, obviously, but also as a member of this board, you know, to lose those LI projects, you know, at the expense of that is very concerning. So.
Body,
Yeah, I mean, I understand the frustration of kind of not funding those LAP project. And, you know, again, as a county representative, it would have been nice if there were no litigation and the State Road 7 would have been done much earlier at a fraction of the cost that we're dealing with right now. And that definitely would have reduced congestion and reduced pollution. But my question is, similar to my first question, there seemed to be significant increase in costs for State Road 7 extension. I mean, the first segment almost doubled the south segment. What explain, you know, inflation is 10%, maybe material 20-30%. But what justified this huge, I mean, is it litigation costs? Is it something else? This seems to be way excessive of what the inflation is.
And it's in fiscal year $28. So the initial costs were probably in 24, 25 costs. And now it's moved out to 28. So I think moving it out several years has also ballooned out the total cost, because now it's in $28 instead of the year that it was proposed to be constructed, which was much more recent, in addition to the inflation and cost estimate increases.
Tracy.
Yeah, everybody else that's spoken has pretty much said everything I was going to say. So well, the main problem I have is we had no idea that this was happening. You know, we see we're ranked #1. Yay, we got funding. We go back to our city management and tell them that we got funding for this project. It will be built. And then they tell the residents. So the residents expect it, our management expects it. And now we have nothing. We did put a lot of work into it. We met with you guys, we met with DOT to try to get costs down, to work things out. And we pretty much designed this project just for the plant, just for try to get approved. We got design plans ready, but now this project is pretty much canceled, and nobody, you know, I don't know if you contacted anybody, but the people involved in this project, myself and Naresh, we're completely blindsided by this. Since we're shortening projects, why couldn't the State Road 7 be shortened? or something to save that $5 million or whatever they needed to cover these other projects. It just doesn't seem fair. And if we vote and say that these projects are funded, and then they should stay funding. And I know that yesterday they had voted on some type of resolution of something similar to that. And I would be welcome for something like that to happen in this meeting.
Please.
Good morning,
Valerie.
Valerie Nielsen. I wanted to jump in and say a couple things. We're also disappointed. This is in the process of, we had a graphic early, I think it was like maybe slide 2, but in the process of creating, every year we adopt the new transportation improvement program, which is the new outer 5th, 6th year. And in that process, that's when projects are committed. In order to develop that process, we do for that new year, before they're committed, we do a call for projects or applications for projects so that that we can populate that new year. FDOT says oversubscribe so that if funding becomes available, we can fund anything that's in that priority list. So when we call for those applications, we get those projects, we rank them, we provide a list of priorities to FDOT, which is what we were informed the cities and say, you've been, you're eligible for funding, you're our number 1 or 2 rank in the new outer year. And then we provide that list of priority projects to FDOT. FDOT goes back and incorporates that against all the other things that are happening in the work program for what is expected in that new outer 6th year. And they provide us this draft tentative work program. So this is the draft for the new tip that we're going to be committing in July. Our expectation was that these projects there would be enough funding for them in that new outer year, so that then the draft tentative work program goes to central office, goes to gets programmed for the draft tip, and then we bring the final tip next July for that new fiscal year 28, and that's when the projects actually get committed. The letters that we send saying, congratulations, you have been selected as one of our new priorities. They're not yet committed for funding. They're just our priorities in the list. These projects are still our priorities, new priorities at the list. Our conflict, our issue here is that in this list, because these are new projects being added at the bottom of all of our priorities over the next 5 years, everything else that's already committed, all the projects that we've already funded in the tip continue to be in line. What's thrown a wrench in things is that the State Road 7 is our number 1 priority in the board's adopted, not TPA staff, but the board's adopted transportation improvement program. State Road 7 since 2004 is the number 1 priority at the top of the list. So when FDOT goes back and tries to figure out where the funding available is for the new people getting in line, they have to shake that out based on who's in line. So State Road 7 was slated to be funded in this fiscal year 23, and it missed the boat because it's in litigation. Basically, FDOT said, well, that funding, either we try to push this into fiscal year 26, 27, and avalanche everyone who's already committed, which we don't want to do that, or we have to put it out into the new fiscal year 28. However, this is TPA's priority. It's not an FDOT priority. So since it's higher up on the list than these new guys that are just getting in line, we're going to have to put that funding, allocate it to that. So that's the decision that we have to go with at the board. Things could happen between now and 2028. These new projects are still in line. What we've discussed, and again, this is the draft of this new tentative work program that's going to be discussed through the tip next summer. So we're also just getting this information and how things are shaking out. Basically, what happens now is that, and what the other committees have requested is that the draft tentative program moves forward so that everything else can continue moving forward. However, that the TPA board direct TPA staff and FDOT to do everything possible to find funding for these LI projects that we were expecting to have funding in 2028. Everything possible to fund them, whether that's potentially with new TA funding that's coming through, or moving other projects up if possible, but to try to work that out and move forward. State Road 7, there's a lot of unknowns with that. So when litigation will be resolved, when maybe it's sooner than later, we're still not sure. The litigation's out of our control. We're just the planning agency. We never really touch those dollars. Once it gets into the programming, it's the jurisdiction that's constructing it with FDOT. So we're kind of on hold, and this is like a placeholder in that year. These projects are continuing to be in the priority list. They're just not, FDOT can't commit funding to it at this moment in time. However, our intent is to try to work as much as possible to find funding for it. A lot can happen between now and 2028. The other consideration and something that we are looking at is basically right now, we've just looking out to the new fiscal year 29 process. We've just opened up our new grant cycle program. So the consideration that we're looking at is to say, these projects that were prioritized in this last grants and in this current last grant cycle, protecting them as priorities in the list because they're the 2022 priorities, and everyone who applies in 2023, they get added after that. So they'll be funded as soon as possible next. I don't know if that provides clarity, but basically everything that's committed is still funded. These projects that were new applications were our desires, basically our wish list that we sent to FDOT with the hope and expectation that there would be funding for it. However, this other project, State Road 7, that's a TPA board priority, number 1, is higher on the list, and that's what's causing this situation. But our intent, and again, the resolution from the committees yesterday is approved, but with the direction to protect these fiscal year 2022 priorities, these new priorities for 2028, and do everything possible to find funding for that. So I don't know if that provides any clarity, but I just wanted to jump in to say that.
Okay, thanks, Valerie. John?
So maybe you can clarify, and I don't know if you can put up the list of the LI projects. There was the one on the left that said that it was
This SFRJ
remaining,
project.
right? And then there were the other six that were being eliminated. So 2 things. Earlier in the presentation, it was said that they could reapply and be put back into the competitive process, but you're telling us that they're staying on the list. They're just not funded, but they're staying on the list. That seems to contradict
That's
going back into the competitive process.
Sure. So we basically, these are on the list as priorities. And actually I had a conversation with our board chair yesterday, because all this is very new information for everyone. I know we sent out the agenda packet last week, but we're also kind of processing like the situation. So the direction I received from our board chair was we need to protect these projects first before new applications. They need to stay on the list, even if they're not funded right now. And so that's something that we're going to include in that resolution to the board. We're planning to bring to the board as in the resolution, and basically not having them compete with any new applications, having the next in line. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of your question?
No, I think that was the first part. I hadn't gotten to the second part yet. So the second part was, I feel bad for Boca because they were ranked number 1 on the list, during that year. And, not only are 6 projects being eliminated, but the number 1 project is being pushed down the list.
Sure. And I wouldn't term it as eliminated. These were our desires to request funding. They hadn't been funded yet. This is the process to get funded. So they're still in line, and we were hoping to be able to commit funding to it, and we can't yet. But I think the terminology more is they're not being able to be committed yet. However, with FDOT and with the direction that we're hoping to seek from the board and from the committees is to do everything possible to move these up as soon as possible. So I mentioned that the TA program, we're expecting to receive more funds in the next 5 years. We might be able to move some other projects up. We need to reach out to the people that are already committed in the work program and say, would you be able to move up if we are able to allocate these funds to your project, and that would move these up. These projects are slated, we're expected to be for 2028. And that's what right now, we can't promise that. However, we still have 5 more years to get to that. So we can figure this is like the first glance at the draft tentative work program for the new tip next year. So between now and when we see the draft tip, which has like the commitments, we want to work with FDOT, reach out to the applicants. And in terms of these ones, in terms of, if they can't get funding in 2028, then confirming with these applicants saying, if the best we can do is 2029, would you still be interested in receiving funds? So that's more of like kind of that confirmation and having these above 2023 applications.
And I understand your concern with the word eliminated, but it almost feels like Boca got the double whammy of they got, in essence, re-ranked by the SFRTA project is now listed as funded and Boca is not, so it's almost like they got pushed in the number 2 project because of whatever reason. And I don't know what that reason was. I
The
don't know why
reason for that,
SFRTA was
and I think Jason might have mentioned it, but the reason for that is that the LI program is something the TPA created. TA is a grant program. LI is just something we created, a process to be able to capture applications for surface transportation funds. So that's a pot of funds that are eligible for federally aid eligible roads that with money we expect to receive to this county. The SFRTA project was committed with a match of TRIP funds, state funds, a different pot of money through the Southeast Florida Transportation Council. So the match for that, it's like a married project with another funding source. And so that's why that one's being funded, because it's matched with another pot of money from the state. So that's why FDOT looked at it and was like, well, this one's already committed. Half of it is committed through another funding source, and the match was going to be an LI grant application. So that's why that one is currently saying we'll be able to commit this one. These other ones are still in line, but we can't commit at this moment in time for 28.
Bruce? Oh, other Bruce, sorry.
As
To
to
Bruce.
this litigation on State Road 7, is this, maybe you could explain a little bit about what's happening with that? And is a possible outcome of that such that there'll be increased costs for that project and end up having a shortfall for not only projects that may someday be funded in the next 4 or 5 years, but also projects that have already been slated to be funded?
The projects that are already committed for funding, those are committed in the work program. The State Road 7, there's unknowns. It's out of our control. It's not, we're just the planning agency telling FDOT what our priorities are, but that one, I think it is a conversation that, we'll have to have. There's very strong opinions on both ends of that, and it continues to be our number 1 priority that just keeps kind of there and with this litigation. So, there's the possibility that things could get resolved and maybe it's ready to go sooner than fiscal year 28. Right now, we were trying to preserve the funding for everything that's already committed. Potentially, the TPA could go after a federal grant to help fund that, and then funding could be available for additional the projects that are in line.
What is the litigation? What is it over?
So the litigation, again, we're not in the middle of that, but to my understanding, it's the Army Corps of Engineers with the city of West Palm Beach with environmental permits, redesigning the design of the project with environmental concerns. It continues to be revisited, and to our knowledge, the latest we've heard from FDOT is that it's at least another 9 months for the next hearing. So they're in the weeds of the design and environmental permits and lawsuits that are going on. And we're kind of, maintaining since 2004, this project continues to be the number 1 project on the entire list. These new guys are 2022. So we have a whole list of projects. These these new applications that we were trying to add on to the list at the bottom, they're down here and these ones, that one's up here. And unfortunately, it is the same sources of funding. And so FDOT looks at the list that we give them as a board, as our board gives them and says, who's number one on the list? This is how much money we have. And here's who we have to, you know, they go in order. So again, those projects that we've already committed in the tip are committed. All the applications that we've received and we've adopted in tip, these were new applications that we were hoping to get into the next year's tip. And we can't commit yet, but we want to do everything we can. And again, it's new information. This is the draft tentative program that comes before the draft tip and before the final tip.
Tracy.
Okay, I've worked for a city, county and FDOT, so I understand all this. I just, what am I supposed to say to the resident who calls and says when my project being built, and I gotta say it's no longer funded, and they say, well, what happened to that? Something $20 trillion and $44 billion that Florida's supposed to get for projects. Why? Where's that money? We got $44 billion in Florida from that I know of. What is District 4 doing with that? Why can't they find the 10 million or whatever for these projects within that money?
Okay.
So a lot of clarification right now. So let me start from the beginning. The project's funding this passenger rail project, you see it's construction funding in 2026, not 2028. So although it's in that ranking of 2022, all those projects on the right are 2028 funded projects. With this particular transit project, it's being advanced actually to 2026 because they have matching funds in this regional. I misspoke and said that they were matching transit funds, but they're not necessarily transit funds that are being matched with it. They're regional funds from CEFTEC, which is a regional. There's a regional network where you can specifically apply the funds that SFRTA is available to receive. And so they're getting those funds in advance of 2028. And so where that particular project is being programmed in advance of 2028 because there's already additional matching funds to fund that particular project. Now moving on to Boca Raton for the 2021 project. That project had some issues from the beginning because it crosses a railroad. So I know that that project wouldn't have been funded even if we had the funds available because of the railroad crossing was deemed ineligible to be applied for for surface transportation funds. So when we went through the vetting process, crossing the railroad was not feasible and not able to be funded through this particular funding source, which was a significant portion of the overall grant. The shared use path was something that was going to be built up to the railroad, cross the railroad, and then extended to the other side to make that connection. And that railroad piece got taken out of the project. So we're still needing to work collaboratively with Boca Raton and FDOT to find some other funding source to build that piece across the railroad. So I know from the vetting process for that particular project that it had some significant challenges of crossing the railroad, and it would, even if there was funding, that project most likely would have not received funding, is what I heard from FDOT, because it's program ready in that the shared use path up to the railroad was, but not crossing it. And that kind of bisects the project and eliminates the real true connectivity that Boca Raton really wanted to establish, was safely getting across that railroad to the other side. So that was really, that was an impediment of, you know, the overall intent of the project. So with that being eliminated, it eliminated almost $1 million from $1.5 million project. So, you know, a good portion of the funds were removed right away. So we're still going to work towards finding other funding to cross that railroad and keep that project alive, because we know it's a priority of Boca Raton and it's a priority of ours, and they have applied for those funding. And there is railroad funding available. We just have to work more closely with FDOT to address that particular project. And then the governing board will have the ultimate say on what happens to these particular projects. I know I stated previously that we'll consider these for next cycle, but this has been a moving target. It's developing over yesterday and today as we craft this, endorsement for these particular projects. But the governing board will have that say next Thursday to say, where do you want to put these projects? And the indication is preserve them as is and prioritize over this current year cycle. But if they make that decision, then, we'll see these advance. And ultimately, we have from now until June before we formally adopt. So there's plenty of time in between to find additional funding for an outer year, which is 2028.
Okay, okay. So Fadi,
It's along the same line what you just said. I think for us to vote on the motion, since we all agree that these projects are not deleted, the just basically would be considered next funding cycle or when funds are available. Maybe this statement need to be part of the motion we vote on.
And that is consistent what happened with the Technical Advisory Committee and the Citizen Advisory Committee. They endorsed the draft tentative work program as presented and included language to also find funding for the local initiative projects 21 through 27. So that particular language was included in the endorsement for the draft tentative work program, and you certainly could do the same or add any additional language you see fit.
I think if everybody's made their comments, I think from just summarizing what the discussion here is that we're the Vision Zero Advisory Committee. We should be standing up and protecting those projects that provide for bicycle, pedestrian, multimodal, safety. And, I'm glad to hear that the other boards, the CAC and the TAC is also recommending the protection of those types of improvements for safety for pedestrians and bicycles and multimodal. So it makes sense for us to continue with that. I think part of the, confusion was what John brought up earlier was about how, we're going to put these back into the mix for the next grant cycle, but, understand that we don't want to just reprioritize. We want to protect those because that should be our charge is those projects that are moving the needle on those things that we believe are important, which is Vision Zero, protecting, bicycle, pedestrian, and our charge isn't necessarily making the roads run more efficiently, although that's part of the whole discussion, but to get a different way to, to encourage people to get out there and do more. So, I personally, when I hear the resurfacing projects and things like that, well, what a part of those resurfacing projects, as you come to this board, reinforces the bicycle, pedestrian, multimodal safety features so that we can understand those features better. Are there ways that we can skin that cat with some of this money? Because I completely understand and agree with everybody about the inflation, but we definitely, as a summary, should, come out with an endorsement. Let's protect what this board stands for. And those are the goals of Vision Zero.
Yeah, so it's good to have a consistent message across all three of the committees to the board that will hear this particular, we'll hear your concerns on Thursday, and that will be echoed, from the TAC and the CAC, and having the same consistent message of protecting these particular projects while still endorsing the draft tentative work program sends a clear message to the governing board that all of our committees agree that these projects are locally driven. They're a priority of all of the committees, and a lot of work has been put into them, and to protect them, to not just advance them for a future cycle, but remain in the 28 year as intended.
Right. So Joan?
Yeah, I think protecting them is great, but I would really like us to take, go a little farther and actually say that I would really like State Road 7 to be taken another look at and take a look at these at the same time. Because these are all things that are going to promote pedestrian and bicycle and alternatives to automobiles. And we're our number one, and I know I haven't been here that long, but our number one project is out west, where we're creating more sprawl and we're putting more cars on the road, and there's no alternatives being really presented out there. So I don't support this.
John,
So I just want the group to know, obviously, I'm going to vote against this if the motion is to endorse it, even with language about preserving or finding funding for these projects. My vote against that endorsement is nothing against adding the language and the projects that we're encouraging funding for. It's purely based upon West Palm's objection to State Road 7. So I just want to clarify that my objection, if we choose to endorse it, is nothing against those projects. So
so I think that's all of our comments. Do we have a motion? Wait. Fadi, do you have a question or we have a motion on the floor?
I mean, if you can use the same language from the one used by other committee to make sure that these projects are protected.
Can you read that?
Yes, let me grab the slides from yesterday.
Just a minute. She's going to pull up the slides from the other presentations. And you can use the same language, or you can also include the State Route 7 as part of that language if you wanted to strengthen it or keep it as is. But the message is going to be clearly received that State Route 7 is the consequence of not seeing the funds being applied to local initiatives. That is where it went because it's all in that same fiscal year 2028.
Sorry, my changes just needed to load for you guys to see. So this was the motion from the CAC yesterday. It reads a motion to recommend endorsement of fiscal year 24 to 28 draft tentative work program with the provision that FDOT finds funding for LI projects 22-1 through 22-7. TAC had a slightly different motion. Their motion was to recommend endorsement of fiscal year 24 through 28 draft tentative work program with LI projects 22-1 through 22-7 to be funded in the DTWP draft tentative work program.
Do we have a motion for one of those? Fadi, anybody?
Either one is fine with me.
Need a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend endorsement of the fiscal year 24 to 28 draft tentative work program with the LI projects 22-1 to be funded in the draft tentative work program.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
David? Okay, so it sounds like we might need to go individually.
Yes, we can go individually.
Okay.
Tracy Phelps,
No.
Bruce Rosenzweig,
Yes.
Craig Pinder,
yes.
Head is absent. Joanne Oliva,
Nay.
I'm sorry, Joan. Joanne Scaria,
Yes.
Body,
Yes.
JC Berry,
Yes.
David Willich,
Yes.
Jean Matthews is absent. Bruce Goyton. Could you put it into the mic, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Michael Owens,
Is it possible to ask a really quick question before I answer?
Chair.
We have a motion on the table.
No, I'm just, if I can, it's fine. It was just something I just, if I can't ask it, it's okay. I'll just-
Can you ask the question after?
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, then if that's the case, nay.
Christian Santa Gonzalez,
Yes.
Amy Alvarez is absent. John Roach,
No.
Stephanie Thoburn.
Yes.
This motion does pass.
What was the vote?
9-4.
9-4? Okay. Sorry, Michael Owens, do you have your question now?
Oh, no, no worries. I was just wondering, there's, and this may have been brought up again, it was, there's no guarantee that this can't happen again in the future, correct? I mean, we may have to, after we rank projects, we may have to defer them for, if this moves forward, we may have to do this again, maybe not next year, but in the future, we may have other projects that we may have to just postpone, correct?
It's all dependent on funding. So the governing board will make a decision on what the fate of these projects are, whether they're preserved and prioritized before this next grant cycle, the current grant cycle for 2029 fiscal year 2029 funding, which is this current grant cycle. These projects are the 2028 grant cycle. And so if the board preserves these, then these would be advanced before any 2029 grant cycle projects, which is the current cycle. So that's how it could play out, or it could play out differently, but it's up to the governing board to make that decision. I don't think you'll see these projects again in terms of the overall ranking when we conclude this particular grant cycle in fiscal year, in February, when this grant cycle ends. It depends on what they decide next Thursday as the governing board. If they mix these projects in with this current grant cycle, you may see these projects again, and you may have to, that would be when you would see the total list of projects for 2 years and vote on that ranking, but that remains to be seen.
So it's possible.
It's possible.
Okay. All right, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Michael. But thanks for hanging in there. The next item is information items, and there's a fiscal year 2022 annual listing of obligated projects. Jason, are you
Sure.
going to present this item?
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So continuing on. This is an informational item, so there's no vote required at the end of the presentation and discussion. So this is the fiscal year 22 annual list of obligated projects. And so to explain what the obligated projects are, in your backup information in the packet, there's a list of projects. There's 3 different columns, and the first one is the total amount that is programmed in the TIP for these specific projects in 2022. So that's the programmed amount that was allocated to those projects, dedicated to those projects. And as they get constructed and as they move through their process, those funds become obligated or reimbursed up to the amount that they spend on those specific projects. On occasion, they don't spend all of the funds, and funds can be rolled forward into another year because a lot of these projects straddle multiple years. So although there's all of the funding stays with the project until it's fully completed. And at the end of the process, sometimes there's either additional funds left over, and those become de-obligated funds, funds that are left over after closeout when it's near completion or at the end of the construction process, or at least the completion of the project. And so that's what you see in the tables. So with some of that, the question is why does FWA, Federal Highway Administration, approved obligations not match the tipped program amounts? Why is there differences? And there's a few different reasons why there are differences. And one of those is project phases may not be completed in the year that the funding is allocated, because it's fully funded all the way through construction, but the construction may straddle different years. And so, as is the case with the TIP document, the first amendment, the first change to the tip document is always the roll forwarded, is a roll forward amendment, and that's at the request of FDOT to maintain concurrency for funding for these particular projects to roll forward unspent funds into fiscal year 2023. So a lot of these projects, several projects, including the ones in the obligation report, those funds are just rolled forward into 2023 to preserve those funds and maintain those funds with those projects. Other cases include FDOT will swap funds, state funds for federal funds within a project. They will fund it with state funds first and then request federal reimbursement later on in the process. So that could be a multi-year process, and we'll see an example of that in future slides. In addition, the FDOT uses the state funds to oversubscribe to federal aid programs to increase the statewide totals each year. This is a safety measure for FDOT to guarantee that they're constructing enough projects. They oversubscribe to the amount of projects that are eligible for federal aid reimbursements, so they guarantee that they can get the maximum reimbursement of federal dollars. In this particular example, for one of the obligated projects in the list, in this particular case, in 2029, this is a $28 million project, and it was programmed using state funds, which is the advanced construction funds. And then later on, after the project goes through construction and is completed and closed out, they'll seek federal reimbursement of those funds. So what you see in the tip is there's no funds actually being requested in the tip. It's not in the tip document with current year funds, or at least previous year funds in 2022, but you're seeing a reimbursement of, in this case, almost $7 million of federal funds. And this is the state's mechanism to fund the projects with state funds and then get federal reimbursements later on in the process. And that's the oversubscription of projects to maximize reimbursement of federal funds by spending state funds first and then getting reimbursed afterwards with federal funds. This is a breakdown of all of the tip sections within our tip document. It kind of it gives you a breakdown of the total amount. So you see here, it's 242 million is the total amount programmed in the tip for fiscal year 22 only. And of that 242 million, there was about 80 million spent in fiscal year 22. De-obligated amount was less than 2 million, or less than 3 million. And then the remaining funds for the fiscal year 22 is 165 million. And the majority of those funds remaining are the funds that are then rolled forward into 2023, which is our current tip document, which you see those funds being rolled forward when I do the first amendment to the tip document of FDOT's request to roll forward unspent 2022 funds into 2023. And that's what you'll see. That's most of those funds, those remaining funds in the last column. So with that, I could take any questions on this particular item. Or you may still be shocked.
Do we have any public comment on this?
Not at this time.
Okay, so any members of the board want to have any comments or questions on this? Okay, seeing none, let's move on. Okeechobee Boulevard and State Road 7 multimodal corridor study. Brian Rusher, the TPA Deputy Director of Multimodal, will present this item. So there you go.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Stephanie. I appreciate that, Chair Thoburn. Brian Rusher, Deputy Director of Multimodal here at the Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency. Proud to be presenting the final Okeechobee study and Okeechobee and State Road 7 multimodal corridor study to you all. This presentation comes after a long and hard fought study for State Road 7 and Okeechobee Boulevard. It's posted at Palm Beach TPA, okestudy.com if you'd like to have a thorough look at the documents. This presentation is a very high level overview of many years worth of work. So I have Been joined by our consultant team, JP Westner and John Lafferty of Kimley Horn and Kittleson and Associates. In the back of the room also was, there she is, Anna Maria from Urban Health Partners as well, who did the HIA for this study. And with that, I'd like to get underway. Just as a reminder of the study corridor, this is a 13.5-mile multimodal corridor study, which looks from the Wellington Mall up State Road 7 east on Okeechobee Boulevard all the way into downtown. Multimodal corridor studies focus on how we can improve walking, biking, and transit user conditions and service along these corridors. As you might know, using sidewalks, bike lanes, or taking transit along this corridor isn't exactly the most pleasant, comfortable, safe, or convenient experience as was documented in the study. So this project aims to provide and identify improvements for prioritization in the work program to improve those conditions so we have a safe, efficient, and connected multimodal corridor system. As you will see and may know from your experience working with the Palm Beach TPA, we are one traveling public between the 3 Tri-County area. Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County all share populations pretty much on a daily basis. We have an expected population growth from 1.4 million to 1.8 million just in Palm Beach County alone, based on our 2045 transportation plan. Those numbers are likely low, given the recent population influx due to the COVID pandemic. In the region of the Tri-County area, we were projected to go from 5.9 million to 7.5 million. Our long-range transportation plan will be getting underway next year, very early in the year, and we'll be updating these numbers and working with the CEFTEC on our regional transportation plan as well. But returning back to our local area, the Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency, through its 2045 long-range transportation plan and the Palm Transit Development Plan, both identify what you see on the screen as the 561 corridors listed here in blue. And in 2045, these corridors could account for up to 94% of all non-farm jobs and almost 70% of the population within a 2-mile boundary, which is this blue outline here. What that means is that we could provide enhanced transit service through our 561 plan, working with our partners at FDOT, County, and PalmTran to ensure that people have access to a better transportation system for using transit and moving us into the future. So I'll let our consultant team kick off the multimodal study goals. So JP, the floor is yours.
And thank you for your time this morning. When we look at multimodal corridor studies, we have a series of goals that we try to achieve in kind of all the studies. We want to maximize throughput in the corridor using a transit first lens. So when we think about the people that we move people ultimately, right? And there's lots of different ways that can happen through single occupancy automobiles, through trains, through buses, through bikes, through walking. So how do we maximize that? We want to improve the first and last mile safety. So as it relates to transit stations and transit stops, what does that trip to the transit station look like? And how do we improve that quality of life of someone who is using that? We want to increase access to affordable housing, education, jobs, and healthcare. We want to utilize the space that we have within the available right of way. So looking at cost efficient savings by not having to widen the road or buy additional right of way to increase the cost of the projects. And then ultimately, we want to have a balance of both land use and transportation improvements. So how do we look at opportunities for redevelopment and infill opportunities? When we look specifically at Okeechobee and State Road 7, we see a growing corridor with competing demands. Right now, about 97% of the people traveling in this corridor are doing so via a single occupant vehicle. So somebody in their car driving back and forth to work or for whatever their daily needs are. With that, within the 2 miles of the sort of core study area, there are about 220,000 residents and 185,000 jobs. And as Brian mentioned, we're seeing that that's going to significantly increase over the next series of years, both on the jobs and on the resident side. So how do we begin to balance that when we're talking about 140,000 people that are using the corridor each day, and 97% of that are moving with vehicles? As that begins to increase, what are our options for continuing to move that amount of people? Okeechobee is, for the most part, built out in terms of all the properties along the right of ways have been developed in some form. There's a handful of parcels that are still what we call greenfield, but for the most part, it's built out. So the amount of lanes and the size that it is kind of set to a degree. So we have a space that will likely remain the same, but we need to move more people through it. So when we think about why transit, we think about transit as an aspect of trip reliability. We can guarantee through transit, we can move more people in the same amount of space, and we can do so in a reliable way. We can also bring reliability through transit to the automobile world by helping to offset impacts at intersections and other things that cause delay in an overall trip. So again, as we're thinking about what is the sustainable way to move forward, we want to start to shift the mode balance. And we're not talking about cutting out half the cars so everybody takes a bus. We're talking about small percentages. If that 97% could drop by 5 or by 6, that's a huge amount of transit in the scheme of things, and it begins to balance out the safety and the reliability of that corridor network. So we didn't plan this and come up with these ideas in a vacuum. We did a lot of outreach over the last 2 years, and a lot of it, because of the pandemic, was digital online. But we did take a lot of time when we started to get certain ideas and certain comments back and certain trends to go out into the field and actually talk with users about what they were experiencing. So we got on the bus, we rode the buses, we talked to people on the buses, we talked about their trip from their home to the transit stop to the bus. What were their experiences? We talked to people driving. What were their frustrations at the intersections and moving through the corridor? We looked at the different aspects of safety and of, again, sort of the experience when you're waiting in the bus. One gentleman we spoke to had a very powerful story of, only having the PalmTran bus as his only means to move around to get to both friends and family. But he's 67 and sitting out in the sun is no longer something that is comfortable for him. And not that it's comfortable for any of us, but a very kind of powerful story of just, the decision that we make when we think about what is at a bus stop. And as we think about what kind of transit we provide for the people that live and work and their lives in this corridor. So as we started to kind of bring that together, we started to think about, well, what are transit options? And I want to transition to John to talk about what some of those ideas were.
Thanks, JP. Good morning. So as a first step, what we did is we start to look at and understand what are the different transit options that we want to begin to evaluate. And this slide reflects that with, if you look at the upper left corner, a no build, no change, or essentially a no action. Continue as to operate transit in the corridor as we do today. And then moving further to the right, looking at what other types of investments that can be made, whether it's mixed traffic, bus operating a mixed traffic, or greater investment into having that exclusivity that improves reliability of transit in the corridor through various bus options. And then at the bottom, we also looked at rail, specifically light rail transit, an option that would run at grade or at street level, as well as an option on elevated rail. So when we started this process and looking to craft a vision on Okeechobee Boulevard, we're looking for projects or premium transit investment that can begin to transform land use, economic development, as well as public health throughout the corridor. And in doing so, and when we dove a little bit further in our evaluation, we looked at the existing operating environment, the environment socioeconomic characteristics, as well as the multimodal options, traffic, and how that operates within the corridor. And these are some of the general findings that were a result of that evaluation and from what we heard. And again, as you saw earlier, trying to determine how this aligns with those various goals and objectives for the multimodal corridor and some of the information that JP presented. And what we found out, and ultimately we're looking at for a vision for this corridor, is center running dedicated light rail. And what I want you all to focus on this slide is really the concept, that upper half, and looking at what and how we could transform the corridor within its existing right of way. to implementing this vision of light rail transit running in the median and at grade. And really, why center running dedicated lane LRT? Again, as a vision, it really aligns with those goals and objectives. It really speaks to the point of trip reliability and having its own fixed exclusive guideway, improving the travel time from the western portion into downtown West Palm Beach. It provides those opportunities for improved health and safety. Again, with this fixed investment, a long-term investment, we're looking at not just the fixed guideway itself, but at stationaries. How do you access? How do you connect? What are those other types of investments that will follow to improve safe access, connectivity, as well as potential redevelopment, economic development through the county, which we heard throughout our public outreach process and engaging with various stakeholders. And then ultimately, it has the capacity to be scalable in terms of how the demand increases or improves once the system is in place. So as a vision, this was the alternative that was recommended. JP.
In addition to looking at specifically the alignment alternative, so what's happening in the right of way, we also took a look at what the land use and economic development potential is. So if you can imagine, the yin is the alternative roadway and transit alignment, and the yang is the development footprint that can come from this kind of a transit investment. And the aspect of that is what we call transit-oriented development. At its heart, TOD is a pedestrian-scaled, dense, compact form of development that puts a lot of people, a lot of jobs, a lot of activity focused in a core area around a transit station. So we usually look at a half mile to a quarter mile from a given station, and we look at what happens if when redevelopment starts to occur. I'll say that developers in general will look at investment in transit, especially something that is a little more permanent like light rail, and say that's a clear, strong investment. We want to invest there. And we get this growth pattern that starts to occur near and around transit stations. So how do we want to control that growth, though? We want to also solve some of our other problems like walkability to the station or walkability in those given neighborhoods. We want to create smaller, more connected streets so that it's easier to walk, easier to cross the street. We want to encourage mixed use development where you have a vertical integration of residential, commercial, retail, that kind of a thing. And we want to make sure that we include things like parks and open space and stormwater considerations. One of the interesting aspects of the Okeechobee corridor is a very high percentage of properties were built in a time frame right around the late 70s, early 80s, which predates Florida stormwater laws. As those properties are coming into 50 and 60 years, the existing properties as they are starting to get to a place where the building no longer is going to function without being torn down. And when it gets torn down and rebuilt, it has to match code today. When that happens, they'll have to meet stormwater requirements, which means less, probably overall less parking, stormwater management facilities, those kinds of things. And that cost of redevelopment is going to go up. And then it's going to stay stagnant if there's not something that's helping it to move along, like an investment related to TOD. So we see kind of a lot of dovetailing efforts. We can increase our sustainability aspect of it. We can help solve some stormwater problems. We can get better growth development, and we can focus it around mobility needs and smart growth. So what does that look like? For each of the station areas that we have in this project, we took a detailed analysis look at that quarter mile, half mile radius from a transit station. We looked specifically for what we call underutilized properties, which were properties where, in this case, very simply put, the building value is 40% less than the total of building and land value. And that's an indicator to us of something that's going to be redeveloped in the very near future. That means the building doesn't have enough value to the overall property. It's cheaper to raise it and rebuild it than it is to try to renovate it. When that happens, again, it gives us a chance to reorganize how that property works into something that's more walkable and more safe. So we looked at those, we looked at vacant properties, and we said, how will this grow in the next 20 to 30 years? How could it grow to support not just the transit and mobility services, but proper growth? So again, we looked at those properties, and for each one, we kind of developed a transit-oriented development plan or station area plan. For the State Road 7 and Okeechobee Station, there's a potential for about 1,300 new homes. And of that, if we use a 15% capture, we could get about 200 affordable units there. About 5,600 potential new jobs. And then the key piece, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, is the additional ad valorem tax. So we also looked at what is the land value and the taxable value of all the properties within this given quarter mile area of the station. And what is that today? Well, what we found is it's not a very efficient use of land. If we compare it to other areas where development is occurring, there's a very low ratio of what we can get out of that land. And what that means is, like I said, we have a lot of aging properties. Those properties are not as valuable. They could be with simple redevelopment. And that begins to add more into the tax rolls, which begins to, at least in Florida, the way we generate money to pay for infrastructure and to pay for things, we use it through things like property tax. So that's an offset there. We also, as part of this, looked at the open space system. So you can sort of see at this location, there's an existing drainage swale along the east side of State Road 7. How does that sort of get integrated into the overall development footprint and actually kind of brought into the center? So you can imagine the green spaces are sort of working together to provide a lot of the stormwater output, as well as just placemaking and open space. Also, how do we begin to integrate key concepts like park and ride into a station, and how do those adapt and form within that development over time? So back to the revenue projection on the diagram to the left, you see the current value of the properties that are there. And again, we did this for each station area and looked at what potential there could be. And we're seeing that today there's about a 400 million value capture of that land with development that's dense, compact, focused around transit. We could see potentially in a medium sort of concept, an additional 632 million worth of value capture. And the bar graphs kind of again show those aren't building heights, so don't panic, but they show just what the value relative to each other, each of the properties are doing. And we see traditional patterns where properties that are closer to the roadway have a certain amount of value versus those a little bit further back. And that's where we want to capture that walkable and core area network. We also, again, looked at what that affordable housing potential is as it relates to when we want to increase that, the cost of that affordable housing as it relates to subsidies and other things that affordable housing developers need to make their projects balance. What is that difference? And again, you see there's a good ratio between what additional value capture we may get out of the future land ad valorem taxes and what we may need to give for affordable housing. So it's telling us there's a really good opportunity here to include a lot of affordable housing, and these developments will help kind of pay for those as they move forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Brian to close us out.
So in closing, this is a vision study. The next step for us, as outlined on the screen, are to implement projects, incorporate land use and economic development options and incentives into the corridor, and then further refine and analyze. But what does that mean? So first and foremost, the TPA has already programmed transit signal priority and enhanced shelter stations located along Okeechobee Boulevard for existing transit service. So what this means is that buses will be able to operate more efficiently to help build the rider base, and that those enhanced transit shelters will provide a better and more convenient service for users that either don't have a shelter or needs drastic improvements to the existing shelters that are out there now. For land use and economic development, we've been working very closely with all of the cities and the county along the corridor to help understand how we can better incorporate these TOD recommendations. As Jonathan mentioned, there are 13 potential station areas with about $10 billion of potential economic ad valorem taxes to be recaptured, which vastly outweighs the cost for operations and capital of any of the alternatives potentially implemented. So we have the option to put in transit through economic development alone. And then finally, further analyze and refine. As mentioned earlier by Andrew and Jason, who have departed for other work, Okeechobee Boulevard will have a feasibility study of the transit alternatives in the draft tentative work program included for fiscal year 25 to further refine this analysis, which will include a standard FDOT look at the corridor through a transit lens and a multimodal improvement lens. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions on behalf of the project team. I'd like to thank you and on behalf of the TPA. This has been a long study. Lots of hands have been in it, and we're happy to have it posted online at Okeechobee at the website listed on the screen now. So thank you.
Are there any public comments?
Not at this time.
Okay. I see David.
I do have a couple questions, but I want to make a couple comments first. I come from a city that's had light rail transit for probably the last 100 years. They also have light rail transit on road. They also have flex lanes. I didn't seem like that was even discussed, but they also have dedicated bus lanes, which they've had for 40 years too. So I've got to see the success, and problems, involved with both ways. So I don't know. I'm curious to see how this goes forward. But my questions were, if the light rail transit was done, it seems like all the turns could only be done at the major roads, like all the turn lanes along Okeechobee would disappear.
I will invite Mr. Lafferty up to make the comments on it, but there are means to controlling access which can be addressed, and I'll let him kind of expand upon that.
Yeah, we, as part of this vision study, we didn't get into that level of detail. We were looking at, again, what we could fit within existing right of way. Anticipating that we'd be able to maintain not only the through lanes, but also at least a turn lane at intersections. I know that there's going to be further detailed study done by the Florida Department of Transportation, since it is their arterial, that would delve into looking at those constraints. How can they maintain access, and then really getting into the traffic operations aspect of it to mitigate any type of impacts that may occur. So, what we were tasked with doing with this study is taking an overview look at the technologies, understanding interaction at a conceptual level, and really trying to identify any type of fatal flaws, which at this point in our analysis, we did not. So again, I would offer just stay tuned. I know there's going to be more detailed study done by the state that will really get into those specific technical issues.
I was also curious about the cross section. It looked like there was 3 lanes on one side and 5 on the other.
We'll get that pulled up and if you could, but I also wanted to mention that in the analysis, our consultants did identify a series of A streets and B streets, which could contribute to access management at the station areas as well. So it looks like Amanda is pulling up the presentation.
Yeah, I think it was the
And these are-
original one. It was a cross section all the way across. It looked like there were 3 lanes on the right and 5 lanes on the left, not counting turn lanes. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah, this one, I think.
Okay, so John or
Oh, maybe no, this is
It's the next one.
the next one. Yeah.
The rendering.
that one.
1, 2.
So left turn lane.
Yeah, see, this rendering, we're trying to maintain the through movements with still a left turn lane.
I swear there was another one that had 5 travel lanes on one side and 3 on the other, but maybe, I don't know. I need glasses, so it could be my issue. I'm trying to squint my way up there.
It may be this one, or this is this particular diagram right here is where the light rail would turn to go toward south onto State Road 7 or north, and then turning to go east on Okeechobee. To specifically to your question, the majority of Okeechobee today has a pretty fat median, and that's where we're gathering a lot of our space for the light rail alignment. So in terms, for the most part, the left turns that exist today, they might spatially shift over, but we'd be using a lot of that green median that's out there today. Where it gets tight, where it's tighter in those areas, we may need to look at certain aspects of lane reduction, or narrowing of travel lanes as they are today, or potentially even looking at how do we solve that specific intersection arrangement. To Brian's point, part and parcel, I was kind of making the allusion to yin and yang when we looked at some of these plans with the detail analysis here. Part of this is if part of the left turns or the turning traffic that's being made is about certain access to other properties or ways to get around. Building that parallel network within there begins to create alternatives for that travel. And at the one that we looked at Military Trail, for instance, the cross-country mall site kind of blocks off any sort of east-west movement south of Okeechobee in terms of getting to other businesses on either side of the mall. Just opening that up and reconnecting some streets there means a lot of folks that are using the intersection at Military and Okeechobee can now use local streets to get to their local needs without having to be on the larger system. So a lot of these things, again, to John's point, they weren't fatal flaws that say the idea isn't going to work. The idea is going to work. It's a matter of we may have to have some unique solutions for specific areas, but overall the idea is valid and it's going to move people in a different way.
And if I may
Okay,
just make one, I know you got another question, but just to make one quick point, we did recognize, I mean, you brought up with signalized intersections. We also recognize when looking at the median for this fixed guideway right away, there's a lot of unsignalized intersections provide access to development. So that's something that's going to warrant further study to understand, one, that interaction, two, what are trade-offs if we to push that making those left turns to the nearest signalized intersection, how does that affect traffic? These are all answers and a lot more detail that we didn't get to in this study, but anticipate in the FDOT study to address that.
Okay, well, I look forward to, being involved with the FDOT study. Okay, that's it.
Fadi,
If you look at the map between Okeechobee and North Lake, there's no other east-west connection. I don't know if one day we're gonna have Roebuck extension or not. So basically, Okeechobee is really one of the most critical east-west corridor in Palm Beach County. And also State Route 7 is a very important corridor. I mean, the concept looks great. We're all for having transit, evaluating, looking forward. And my concern, adding what David mentioned, first of all, you have to do high-level analysis. Probably you said it's going to be the next phase with DOT. You're going to have transit in the center. You're going to have pedestrian crossing. And we know every time you push the pedestrian button, you create a huge 2, 3, 4, 5 cycle disruption along Okeechobee. So we really expect at the minimum something like VISM to be evaluated. Hopefully you run it, everything works great. You can manage with one left turn. But unless you do high level analysis for this most important corridor that we have in the county, the east-west corridor, we're not gonna have any confidence in the result. So it needs to be simulated. Please don't use equation, high capacity manual or synchro or whatever. It have to be calibrated, simulated with all the left turns, with all the pedestrian impact. And if it works, we'll applaud you. But if there is no high level analysis being done, we're not going to have any confidence in it.
Thank you. And I think one thing I want to tag on to that is, the purpose of this being a vision study is to really look out and say, what is our potential? What can this move towards? Being out there on the corridor today, like I said, it's 97% single occupancy vehicles. It's hard to imagine what this can be based on the way that people are moving through the corridor today, right? It's hard to kind of see that. There's going to be trade-offs in either case, but this is something that happens in all communities as density occurs, as people continue to move to an area, and as we are challenged with those growth rates. Those corridors and those places have to change. I agree with you, Okeechobee is a major east-west connector. That's actually why transit is so important on it, because we're saying this is where a lot of people are coming and this is the corridor they're using to move east and west. So absolutely, we need to have solutions that are going to continue to work for the patterns that are there today, but also look towards what are future patterns and how can we help stimulate the land use to begin to change the way people are moving through the corridor. And again, ultimately, there's going to be a point where we're going to have to make some decisions about what those trade-offs are. Is the transit trip a certain, in terms of reliability between the corridor, is that a certain amount of time? Is sitting in traffic another certain amount of time? Are we going to have an exchange of what that's going to be? And what does that mean for the communities like Royal Palm Beach and Wellington? What does it mean for folks that are trying to get to downtown? And how do we kind of handle all those competing needs on the corridor?
Tracy? Is that you? Oh, I'm sorry, Christian.
That's okay. I just wanted to say this was a really great presentation. It really hit all the points as to, you know, the intent, the purpose, and the reason why we're doing this and this vision as to, you know, from a long range perspective. I just wanted to just state that this is just part of a solution to the, you know, the long range issue as to the overpopulation that's going to end up happening in, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years. I visited Salt Lake City, DC, and I see how this type of like corridor mass transit does solve part of the issue of moving people around. So I just wanted to say this is a great vision. I know it's been in the works for a long time. Just want to say great job, TBA staff and the Treasure Coast agencies and all the agencies that have been involved. Thank you.
You, Christian. And I just wanted to note on that comment, you know, you brought up a city. We did look at peer municipalities from around the country, similar demographic conditions, and we projected certain numbers for Palm Beach to have ridership, but in each of those municipalities, 4 out of the 5 scenarios, the transit ridership beat the expected numbers. So I think that's important to reflect on, and Wellington's done a really great job incorporating and working with us to get the TOD recommendations in line, especially for those at the Wellington Mall. Things are very exciting in the Western communities. We presented Royal Palm, Wellington, and the Western Communities Council. So we're excited to see what you have going on and coming this way, especially with respect to TOD.
Thank you.
And Craig?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I'll say great job on that. It excites me to see a proposal as such that's before us. But one thing that came to my mind that's looking at the rendering, I know it isn't designed or anything, I was thinking of the level of the pedestrian experience. So looking at the platforms in the center of the roadway, I'm thinking, well, with the climate of South Florida, we know we have a pretty harsh climate. And of course, there isn't any trees there to provide that extra layer of cooling or shading. And also thinking about when there is a random heavy rain event that happens all the time in South Florida. So I would like for those to also be considered if they haven't been considered as yet. I'm pretty sure it would be a part of the plan in the future, but to think about that to make sure that something like this would be seen as successful. Because as a previous transit rider, one of the things I wanted me to get out of riding transit was thinking, darn, I wish I had a car so I wouldn't have to walk in the rain or stand in the hot sun.
Right. And we actually work really closely with our partners in Miami-Dade County, and Miami-Dade Transit is doing a really great job expanding their smart corridors, and they've had very good success, both with planning TODs, but also implementing bus rapid transit corridors, which are future ready from the perspective of increased number of days in heat, increased severe weather events, and weatherproofing their stations, while also creating BRT routes, which are convertible in the future to LRT. So we're working very closely with our partners to the south. You know, recently we attended Railvolution, which is now Impact, and one of the key speakers, the first keynote speakers, brought up resiliency of the transit stations that they're currently building now for their light rail lines. So we have the potential. Broward and Miami-Dade County both have transit operational funds for their systems and are working on these types of services now. So we're closely behind. We still have work to do, but it is something where South Florida will use it. If you build it, they will come. So, yeah.
I'm Craig, on just following up on your comment, and Fadi, your comment. You know, the pedestrian experience, that last mile you touched on, I think is really important. What was the thought about putting it in the middle versus putting it on one side or the other? Because then you have the opportunities to co-locate green infrastructure such as stormwater, open space, those parks that can be used for multi-purpose reasons. And having those locations of of the stations and that relationship within a TOD of the building to the station itself or to the bus stops. And then it helps reduce at least half of the amounts of conflicts with pedestrians and vehicles. And then, versus having it in the middle, because then you can really, utilize your spaces more efficiently. You're right on the edge of the property lines. You can then look at, you're going to be doing land use and zoning changes for these properties along Okeechobee, the West Palm and the county, and the opportunity to work together to reimagine this whole corridor as more integrated, I think really starts to move and spatially starts to understand that urban design a little bit better when you move that corridor to the edge and versus the middle. And then you can, I wanted to touch on green infrastructure. I mean, you were talking about it, but you didn't say it. And I think that one of the things that's really important, particularly in parallel flood legislation and vulnerability assessments, that it's really important to not separate stormwater from our open space and green space and those public spaces, because we're going to need that when it floods. We're going to need those spaces, and to put them separate, sometimes the engineers will just put it underground, which is not a great solution if we're going to be resilient and be able to recover during our, annual hurricane events, folks. Let's be real. So, just want to encourage more of that correlation between the actual line itself and the uses. And don't forget about, the green space, because the opportunities to completely and reimagine this whole is related to the location of this line. And it is fabulous that, you're moving forward with this. So it's incredible work, but I think, there's a little, we need to make sure we cover all those together, and using that word resiliency, green infrastructure, getting the pedestrian walkability so we can get the trees in the right place is all very, very exciting. And keep going, keep working hard.
Yeah, your comments are well taken, and really expect them to be taken into consideration when they get into that more advanced study. Now, just if we take a step back, when we were looking at this as a vision, and initially starting with that first step where we had those various different types of transit technologies, there's bus and rail, and we're really working to get towards a technology, and in this case, as the vision, light rail at grade. We looked at it in the median and looking at, well, if we utilize that existing space to put a fixed guideway as our vision, and I think now once we get to that next step of technical analysis and really diving into rail at grade, we can begin to look at the variability of how we would like to operate it within the corridor. But again, there's going to have to be a lot more detailed analysis and an understanding of trade-offs, and particularly looking at access not just for passengers, but maintaining access and minimizing disruption to parallel or existing development, mixed use employment, retail, residential, and how that interaction is to maintain access, make sure it's safe, but also how we get passengers to access that. Yes, I agree. It's easier, at least on one part of the trip, to access it on the curbside in one direction, but when they have that return trip, if it's on the other side of the street, they still have to have that safe access and connectivity for passengers that then cross back over the street from where they initiated their trip. So these are all things that warrant further technical analysis and see how they interact and impact with each other, and how the multimodal condition of the corridor can function while also serving those opportunities in redevelopment and land use, which we touched upon on this study. So I hate to keep on saying stay tuned, but these are the items that you delve in further now that there's this ultimate vision of what it is. And now it's further looking at to, well, how can this be implemented? Or what other varying options are there to implement this particular vision?
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to touch on, back to your green infrastructure point, which is also a very great point. Probably in this presentation, we're not able to get into all of the things that were part of the thinking that led to kind of what you're seeing here in this quick snippet. I'll tell you that for the majority of these stations where we have these green areas, a lot of those green areas are located in the lower elevations because that's where the water is going to come first. So we're working with the land through redevelopment to put things like stormwater and open space, merging them together so that as this develops, it's developing in a smart way, in a sustainable way. And the other key piece, and John sort of touched on it, is in a perfect world, right? Somehow we'd be able to build this all at once and fix all of these things, and it would have very limited impacts to the community around, right? But that's not how these projects get built. It happens over time, and it happens in between different phases of development. So when we look at, again, implementing this in the landforms that are on Okeechobee today, there's a lot of right turn pockets, a lot of business access along that, something on the BRT or LRT on the sides will disrupt that more frequently than if it's running in the middle. At the same time, we can close that and we can create a better urban environment by having B Street access, alley access off of the A streets and converting that. But that's going to happen either through a master developer or through incremental changes over time. It won't happen all at once. So how do we kind of provide access and provide all the things that are there today for basic amenities with what that vision is in the future? And so that's part of what directed a lot of our thinking on what is an alternative to sort of shoot for the moon for, and then where will we land as we start to get into the feasibility of building it. Back to the point on shade and on that sort of user experience, I cannot understate, and I think if you go to the website and you look at some of the elements from the HIA and some of the outreach that we had, I cannot understate the impact that stories of people along the corridor that we talked to had on just our decision making. I talked about the gentleman that 67, he's too hot to wait at the bus stops and that kind of a thing. Rain at a station, we experience that waiting there. It comes sideways. Even if there's a roof, it's still hitting you on the side. So how does that change how you're thinking about what that station design and platform is? And I'll give one last example. This team helped the TPA a few years ago on the US1 multimodal corridor study, where we ended up with sort of what we call the PTX Express line, which will be a premium transit running along US1. And one of the key things we did there was we did kind of take it a little bit further, and we designed what stations would look like and what are those amenities at the stations. That's got the stations that could be built right away without any additional land or lane repurposing, actually move forward with FDOT, and those are actually going to be built in the next couple of years. And they're going to have stations. They're going to have, stations with protections on the sides. So when you're waiting for the bus, you've got, protection from the weather and shade and all that kind of stuff. So this is a vision, and it will begin to find its way into implementation with projects and steps. And as we are able to make those things happen, this is what will guide how that development occurs. So thank you.
Bruce first.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm sure you have considered, but could you maybe expand a little on factors that you considered as to the safety for pedestrians and cyclists in this arrangement that you've designed?
Yeah, I wish I had the existing condition up, and you could see the little more pronounced of what we did to enhance that. But I know if you look on the outer sections of the corridor here, we did enhance it with a multi-use path on each side of the roadway, as well as providing that bicycle lane with some type of separation or a buffer from general purpose. That we folded into the corridor to help enhance that safety for multimodal use. So those are two.
Was You had mentioned about turn lanes and pockets into the business areas. Those are usually a little dicey as far as cyclists and pedestrians. How do you consider, enhanced safety factors there?
So I will just venture to tell you a story that I've heard about recently from a Palm Beach County water utility engineer who bikes the corridor every day. Westbound is a nightmare for him, especially at Interstate 95. Eastbound, with the recent construction of the buffer between the acceleration lane and the bike lane, has made his experience much more comfortable. So it's a matter of design and factoring in how much appropriate protection and buffer you get as a cyclist before the turn lane starts. And so that's all in the DOT design manual. And they've done a pretty good job at enhancing the facilities for bicyclists, but it's only been a start in one location. We'll get more programmed as we move these into the future.
John?
First of all, thank you for the presentation, and certainly, it's exciting to see the recommendations. And there's obviously, a lot of talk about what happens within the right of way, but it's good to hear, the conversation about transit oriented development and land development and so forth. So I hope that out of this, just as much effort and coordination with, the municipalities that are adjacent to the corridor and things, the more recommendations and specifics you can provide as far as modifications to zoning regulations and things like that to get the type of development that would make this the most successful corridor is going to be important, because without those changes and without those recommendations, the success of what you're proposing to put within the right of way could be determined based upon that. If we don't put a compatible land use pattern and development, the type of development adjacent to that corridor, the multimodal or the light rail may not succeed as well. So, I hope that the recommendations and the work that goes into those recommendations is extensive, and you work closely with the municipalities and, the county and so forth that has development control over that corridor. So.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if anybody else has anything, but thank you so much. We look forward to making more comments on seeing your progress and moving it forward, moving the needle.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chair. We appreciate it.
So the next items are administrative. Items 4A through F are informational, and there's no staff presentation unless requested. Valentina, oh, there you are. Okay. We want to make your pedestrian and bicycle quarterly crash report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you, everybody, for your patience. I know it's been a really long meeting, but I promise this is the last presentation for today. So for this presentation, I'll be providing an overview of the pedestrian and bicycle quarterly crash analysis that we did for Q2 of this year, in addition to providing some of the new information that we added and some of the changes that we made to the document. So before we get into the analysis, it's important to understand why we're conducting these reviews in the first place. So we're conducting these reviews because it implements our Culture Action 3.1 from our 2021 Vision Zero Action Plan. Conducting these reviews on a quarterly review basis promotes discussion and a sense of urgency, and the accumulation of data can reveal any trends and high impact countermeasures. So we went through a restructuring of the entire document to add new information, changes, and we did a restructuring of the layout of the document. And the purpose for this is because we wanted to align the TPA's process with the county and FDOT. So FDOT has a strategic highway safety plan, and within this plan, they have 5 emphasis areas, as you can see on the screen. So what we did is we actually took some of those 5 emphasis areas and condensed them down into 3 emphasis areas: roadway conditions, human behavior, and socioeconomic conditions, which I will touch on in the next slides. Some of the other changes that we made to the document is, as you can probably remember from quarter 1 of this year and last year, we were only including fatal crashes. For quarter 2 and moving forward, we are including serious injuries to the analysis. Also, for quarter 1 and last year, we were including potential actions and recommendations to each quarter. For quarter 2 and moving forward, we will only be including, I said that wrong. For quarter 4 for every year, we will only be providing potential actions and recommendations at the end of the year. So for the analysis, we provided 3 maps. The first one is the pedestrian and bicycle crash maps categorized by mode and crash severity. The second one is crashes on the TPA's high injury network within Palm Beach County. And the third one is crashes on the traditionally underserved index. So for this second quarter, from April 1st to June 30th, we found that there's a total of 39 crashes, which was a decrease from quarter 1 of 23 crashes. However, with that being said, it's important to understand that this decrease in crashes, it's expected during this time because of the seasonal population that we typically see in Florida between winter and spring. We also found that 63% of the crashes were on the TPA's high injury network within Palm Beach County. And we also found that there's a strong concentration of the crashes on the traditionally underserved index on the medium to high area within central Palm Beach County. And as I stated previously, we condensed the 5 emphasis areas to 3. The first one, some of the circumstances that we included for roadway conditions is functional classification, number of lanes, and posted speed limit. For the second one is human behavior. We included impaired driving, distracted driving, and speeding and aggressive driving. And for the third one, socioeconomic conditions, we did an analysis that included aging drivers and young drivers. So for roadway conditions, we found that lane departure crashes actually remained the same from quarter 1, while the other roadway conditions decreased. Mid-block intersection crashes also increased by 1 crash. And for human behavior, distracted driving keeps remaining as the highest of all human behavior, but lower than quarter 1, similarly with socioeconomic conditions for aging drivers. Towards the end of the report, you will see TPA reporting, which essentially is what we're using to report on the activities and actions that we're taking for our Vision Zero goal. So some of the activities and actions that we took for quarter 2, first one is we supported the adoption of the Town of Jupiter's Vision Zero resolution. We also hosted a Vision Zero workshop event to spread knowledge on best practices and funding opportunities. And we also participated in Vision Zero trainings to be better equipped in helping communities and local government reach that goal of 0 fatalities and serious injuries. And that concludes my presentation. I can take any questions at this time.
Do we have any public?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, John. Oh, okay. Nobody else? Everybody's ready to go. Thank you, Valentina. Appreciate it. So the next item is that we don't have a scheduled meeting in January. So our next meeting is February 2nd, and happy holidays, happy new year to everyone. And thank you. John and I thank you for your for your votes of confidence today. So it's 11:41. Thanks so much,